Hello, friends and enemies.
I am a big Cary Grant fan. Along with Humphrey Bogart, Grant is easily my favorite star of Hollywood's golden era. His charm and larger-than-life screen persona were, in my opinion, unrivaled by any of his contemporaries. What's more, his versatility as an actor allowed him to excel at both dramatic and comedic roles alike. In my estimation, he's symbolic of the greatest aspects of old Hollywood: style, charisma, and razor-sharp wit.
Why don't you go and play with the dog?
Why don't you go on with whatever you were doing? Don't mind me.
From the late 1930s to the early 1940s, Grant starred in a number of screwball comedies, a subgenre that became popular during the Great Depression. These were farcical plays on the traditional romance story and often featured quick, overlapping banter, slapstick, and plot lines involving courtship and marriage. American film critic Andrew Saris defined the genre as sex comedy without the sex. Now, Grant featured in many of these films during their heyday, but today I'd like to discuss one in particular, and that is Bringing Up Baby. Bringing Up Baby was released in 1938, a time at which Grant was riding high off the success of The Awful Truth, released 1 year prior. The Leo McCarey-directed comedy catapulted the then relatively unknown actor to stardom and served as a vehicle for showcasing his comedic chops. In Bringing Up Baby, Grant brings that same vigor and energy, dialed back ever so slightly due to the more subdued nature of his character. Opposite Grant is Katharine Hepburn, who delivers an equally terrific performance.
You're angry, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Mm-hmm. The love impulse in man frequently reveals itself in terms of conflict.
Excuse me, the what impulse?
Love impulse.
Yeah.
The film follows David Huxley, a mild-mannered paleontologist played by Grant. Huxley is on the verge of securing a $1 million donation for his museum and is nearing the completion of his Brontosaurus skeleton, a project 4 years in the making. At the same time, the scientist is scheduled to marry his assistant, Alice Swallow. Now, all seems to be going in Huxley's favor, that is, until he meets the free-spirited Susan Vance and her pet leopard, Baby, ultimately entangling himself in a series of wacky hijinks and mix-ups.
That'll teach you to go around saying things about people.
Bringing Up Baby is a film that revels in its idiosyncrasy, with much of its humor derived from placing its offbeat characters at the center of ridiculous and absurd situations. In typical screwball fashion, the film plays heavily with gender roles, taking conventional male and female traits and turning them on their head. Huxley's bookish and affable demeanor are considerably different from traditional leading men of the time, and he's constantly placed in embarrassing, even emasculating circumstances. Fundamentally, it's a story about a man learning to embrace life's absurdities, to loosen up and shed his stiff and formal demeanor. When we are first introduced to Huxley, he is a day away from marrying his assistant, a rather stoic woman who seems more interested in Huxley's work than in the man himself. To put it plainly, he is a bit of a pushover and lacks the courage or sense of humor to properly carry himself through life. In fact, his life at this point can perhaps best be represented by the Brontosaurus skeleton he's working on, inert and lifeless. Then, when Huxley encounters the eccentric Vance along with her pet leopard Baby, the zany circumstances that ensue give Huxley a much-needed jolt. Baby then can be seen as symbolic of the unpredictability and the vivacity that Huxley so desperately requires in his life. It is no coincidence then that his ossified dinosaur crumbles right at the end as he declares his love for Vance.
David, can you ever forgive me?
I
You can. And you still love me.
Susan,
You do. Oh, David.
Oh, dear. Oh, my.
Now, the writing and the wonderful performances by Grant and Hepburn are undoubtedly the highlights here. Dudley Nichols and Hager Wild's screenplay is exceptionally sharp and packed to the brim with witty exchanges, subtle gags, and double entendre. Grant and Hepburn deliver their dialogue with utmost precision, and every joke is executed with pinpoint timing. Despite its fairly positive reviews, Bringing Up Baby was a commercial flop upon its release. The director, Howard Hawks, was initially displeased with the final product, believing that the film's great fault was its lack of normal people. The director was quoted as saying that everyone you met was a screwball. I have learnt my lesson and I don't ever intend to make everybody crazy again. In the years that followed, Bringing Up Baby would be reassessed by cinephiles and critics alike, and is now considered to be among the best comedies of all time. For its sharp and witty dialogue and its standout performances by its two leads, Bringing Up Baby undeniably deserves its status as a timeless classic. Despite being nearly 100 years old, the comedy is still as funny as ever. I highly recommend it.